Hello everyone, this is part 17 of What If Naruto Was a Prodigy Called the Red Demon, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist. To see more, comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, it gives me more motivation. Enjoy. Remember the Second War? Minato began, sitting forward on the table with his elbows, lacing his fingers and setting them palm down. Hanzo the Salamander and his loyalists not only committed mass genocide on his people, but also poisoned nations around Hidden Rain. Minato tapped his pointer finger on the table and sounded in a hard voice, recall the resolution of the war after the then Cage Summit. He fixed a look on Unoki. You were there. He turned to the Raikage. You were there with your father. Lastly, Minato's cold eyes went to Yagura. Your teacher, the second Mizukage, called for that resolution. He was met with a slight smirk from the Mizukage. Using chemical weapons was, and still is, a war crime, and crime against common human decency. Whether or not the crime is being committed on home soil. The other Cage remained silent, recalling the dreadful Second War and outrageous crimes Hanzo the Salamander committed against his people and also across the continent, leaving scores of towns and settlements desolate of life, and leaving several acres of land uninhabitable to that day. It was the war the Sannin were credited by the war criminal for surviving open combat against him, but the memory didn't invoke pride in any of the three. Konoha has a vested interest in the stability of Kiri. My village has expended time and resources to see to the peaceful conclusion to the conflict. He narrowed his eyes at Yagura, who was reclined on his seat, meeting the Hokage's look with a sleepy smile. The deceptively youthful Cage looked the perfect image of serenity. You may say this is the pot calling the kettle black, as Konoha's hands have not been exactly clean at certain points in time, but there is a certain depth of depravity that cannot and should not be tolerated. Minato didn't once look away from Yagura. This person poisoned his own people with hypnotic chemicals and has exterminated those he personally deemed unalterable. My sources have proven it to me. Behind the Hokage, Kakashi passed a folder to an Iron Country guard, who in turn passed it to the Iron Daimyo. The old samurai opened the folder and his lips tightened up at the black and white images he saw. Images of desolation and hopelessness. Men, women and children with vacant stares, withering away to dust inside cramped buildings. Homes being razed down and parents being torn away from their crying, struggling children. People burning at the stake. A shinobi of the mist stomping on a haggard-looking man in front of a small crowd of dull-eyed people, bloodline holders. Piles of bees set ablaze. The Raikage collected the images passed to him and looked at them with a stoic hum, his stormy eyes flickering with shaded emotion. Rasa declined looking at the images, already taken his fill from staring at them not too long ago. Unoki didn't bother reaching for the photos. Not only has it come to light that he has K-scores of his people with chemicals and is actively controlling their minds, he has also wiped out Hidden Rain and all of its populace with a nerve agent. Minato looked about the table. As I'm sure all of you are aware of by now. The Cage didn't move to acknowledge this, but Minato wasn't naive to think that the information had somehow leaked to these other powerful shinobi settlements. The resolution of the Second War condemns Yagura's acts, and I encourage everyone present to commit to stand by justice. Don't let history repeat itself. It was both a warning and a threat. The second Hokage, Tobirama Senju, had raised an alarm when Hanzo the Salamander was beginning his subtle scourge of the continent. When Hanzo was left to do as he pleased unchecked, Hiruzen and Sarutobi declared war on Hidden Rain, and every ally, enemy and neutral party on both sides were dragged in by force. Only after the damage had been done and the warring reached a lull did the five Cage reach a ceasefire agreement. Hanzo the Salamander was judged post-mortem. Hidden Rain closed its doors to the world. A generation of uncertainty and hatred followed. Minato sat back in his chair and crossed his right leg over his left knee. Lord Mizukage, the Iron Daimyo tonelessly called, and the room turned to Yagura. Gentlemen, Yagura began, I admit I've been looking forward to this day, this very moment, for years now. Minato warily sat up and his eyes focused on the Mizukage. The day that my humble self is in the presence of such a legendary shinobi, he made a passive gesture to the Hokage, looking about him with a friendly smile. The yellow flash. Lord Yagura, Mifune warned lowly, also sitting upright at the tone of voice the Mizukage was taking, sensing the rising tension in the room. Yagura ignored the suspicious Iron Leader. The embodiment of all that is good and righteous in this world, or am I wrong? He didn't get any response, but Yagura didn't seem to expect one, continuing. No matter how much you posture, you and your predecessor, the third Hokage, are greedy opportunists that hide your selfishness behind your humanity. Yagura scoffed spitefully, barely holding back from spitting on the ground. He pointed at the Hokage, saying through gnashed teeth, "Don't pretend that anything you do is from the good of your heart. Maintain decorum, Lord Mizukage," Mifune warned once more. "Everything I've done is truly for the betterment of humanity." He hit his C 3 times. "My efforts have ended widespread violence, hunger and wealth inequality across my country. Can you say the same thing about Konoha, not to talk of Fire Country? All in exchange for their freedom," Minato said with a simmering stare. Yagura smirked. "I do what I must." "Tell us, Lord Mizukage," the Kazekage interjected when he saw Minato steadily flatten his feet on the ground, a sign that something was coming. "What must you do exactly?" "Fight for the sake of peace." Yagura nodded. Chakra spiked jarringly from behind the Mizukage, from Mei Terumi, and the eye patch she wore over her right eye disintegrated as a laser whistled out from it, the Kazekage's heart. The Kazekage toppled backwards off his chair and Minato caught the man before he could hit the ground. Rasa's sea bore a fist-sized hole with burnt edges, cauterizing the bee from spilling out of the wound. Then all hell broke loose. The Reikage and Tsuchikage's guards bore down on Hokage and Kazekage's guards, as the Iron Leader's guards hastily evacuated their leader from the fray. Ai and Unoki remained seated, reclined in their chairs and observing as the guards battled. Yagura caught the hook staff Chojuro threw to him and clambered onto the table with a manic grin, leaping off to bring the staff down on the stunned Hokage. Mustering the last bit of strength in his body, Rasa waved his right hand and a wave of iron sand materialized from his right side, punching Yagura aside and the Mizukage through the wall to their left. After that, Rasa exhaled painfully and fell limp. This snapped Minato out of his daze. He picked up the Kazekage, swiftly bending away from another laser prime to see off his head and bellowed, "Fall back." Minato stepped away from Haramakare as Chojuro brought down the giant twin swords to split the Hokage in half. The blades jammed into the wooden floors. The Hokage then spun on his heel and planted a firm kick into Chojuro's face, adjusting his center of gravity to accommodate the Kazekage in his arms. "Now." "Yes, sir," Yugao answered, her teeth clenched as her sword clashed against the sword of a Kumo ninja. She gave a great heave and shoved the man away, and making him trip on the Kumo ninja Yugao had previously dispatched off. She gathered up the injured sand ninja at her feet and slung his arm over her shoulder, quickly limping to the Hokage as they made for the door. Kakashi and Baki hastened to the exit, their eyes on the seated cage and their injured guards. They grabbed Minato's cloak and they were all gone in a yellow flash. Yagura walked back into the meeting house. His hook staff now attached to his back and the crazed look in his eyes was now replaced with a serenely stoic expression. He ignored Mei as she tended to Chojuro's concussion. He walked to his chair and sat down, meeting the darkened stares of his counterparts. "You assured us that his death would be quick and certain." Ai spoke first, his voice deep, glowering at the Mizukage. Yagura assured them with a genial smile, "Believe me, Lord Reikage, Minato is S. We split the remnants of that damned village equally. Resources, territory, and all," Unoki said, making the other men turn to look at him. "As we already agreed. Depending on your cooperation in this venture, yes," Yagura said with a self-assured smile. "We've set this world of ours on the right path to greatness. I'm glad both of you made the right decision." "What about the samurais?" Ai questioned aloud. "They're smart enough to stay neutral, but," he held up a finger when Ai narrowed his eyes with an interjection, "in case they foolishly attack any of us, let me worry about that." He relaxed into his chair and laced his fingers behind his head. "The only thing I need from you both is your cooperation. The spoils of war will come afterwards." In Konoha, Minato appeared before the Hokage's tower, shocking civilians and ninjas alike. The man then collapsed onto his knees, easing Rasa onto the ground. "Dad," Rin wondered and Minato turned to her as more ninjas swarmed around them. He saw Naruto furrow his brow at the curious scene, observing as medics began attending to the Kazekage, as well as Yugao, Kakashi, and the sand guards. Naruto's body vibrated and he flickered to his father's side, catching the man as his father's eyes rolled to the back of his head. Minato's teeth gnashed violently, hard enough for his gums to end, and tears of B trickled down from the inner corners of his eyes. Tsunade, Naruto roared, jolting the bystanders and bringing their attention to their fallen kage. Shizune. But his voice was soon drowned out by civilians screaming. A giant salamander loomed over at the western wall of the village, and the man standing on its head looked down on Konoha with impassive eyes. Alarms lit up the airwaves and panic ensued. At the same time in grass country. Mikoto woke up with a snort, blinking her eyes open and cleaning the line of drool sliding down her chin with the back of her wrist. She licked her lips and cleared her tea, snapping her head to the right when she heard a snorting laugh. She dropped her guard. Sasuke, you know you snore when you sleep, right? He remarked to her, seated beside her on that battered and collapsing bomb shelter. His legs were crossed and he was leaned back on his palms, looking out to the vacant grassland, formerly occupied by the Konoha and Suna camps. He continued when Mikoto's delirious mind fully awoke. Not even the cute kind of snoring. Yours sounds like a pregnant donkey with a deviated septum. Ha ha, Mikoto yawned, opening her mouth wide and stretching her arms high. She unraveled her folded legs and grunted, rubbing her thighs to her knees, her calves to restart proper B flow. That's what happens when you meditate for hours at a time, Sasuke chided with an impassive look, turning his face away from her. Can you walk? Give me a minute, Mikoto mumbled, her legs and bringing her breathing down to a calm simmer, flowing chakra to her extremities to reopen tightened muscles. She glanced at her former teammate, taking a minute to look at the Chunin vest proudly displayed on his torso. Her lips squeezed into a frown and she grunted again, turning back to her purple-red knees. It might be weeks too late, but congrats on ranking up. The boy looked at her incredulously, his eyebrows were raised in bewilderment. Don't look too surprised, she scoffed, wiggling her toes, smirking widely. It's called good sportsmanship. I didn't think you had it in you, Sasuke said with a slow smirk. What happened to breaking my arm? The girl shrugged. Better believe I'll still snap that twig arm, blockhead. Sasuke snorted. There we go. He bumped his fist against Mikoto's shoulder. Thanks, by the way. Mikoto chuckled with her eyes closed, throwing a harmless punch to her former teammate's shoulder, which he barely dodged by leaning away. Her simmering chuckles reduced and the silence was amiable between them. Until Sasuke pursed his lips and exhaled slowly from his nose, saying, I'm sorry about Hinata. Mikoto's jaw hardened and she shifted her purple eyes to her numb calves, rubbing them deeper. She was tolerable. Mikoto's brow furrowed. Tolerable. I could stand her being around. She's not much of a sparring partner, but her not mobbing me everywhere I turn was nice enough. Sasuke shrugged unabashedly, his black stare turning and looking at Mikoto firmly. Plus she made you less annoying. Let it be known that when Mikoto and Sasuke fought, and the girl inevitably triumphed, the girl was not a graceful winner. For anyone else she faced, she would be respectful and help dust them down, but when it came to Sasuke, the 13-year-old boy thumbed his vest and said, breaking eye contact. I've been wearing this with pride, like your brother said I should. He returned his hands to propping him up on that bomb shelter. But it doesn't feel right if my rival, the gratingly emphasized word brought a tingling smile to the girl's lips, and she waited for her rival to continue, is sulking. I might not understand what it means to lose someone that close, not yet anyway, and the whole Gaara thing happened recently, but I doubt Hinata would be happy if you used her as an excuse to not process your emotions. The girl felt her eyes wet with unwept tears and she sniffed, turning her face away from her friend. The weight of Hinata's unstated condition finally fell on her. She pulled her knees to her face and hid her eyes. 10 minutes later, Sasuke hopped off the bomb shelter and Mikoto followed suit. If we hurry, we can catch up to them before they reach Konoha, Sasuke said, referring to the Konoha delegation. It would be easier to allow Mikoto to see Hinata before they entered the village. Thanks for this, Sasuke, Mikoto said with a quiet smile. Sasuke smirked and harmlessly punched her shoulder, simply saying, my idiot rival needed help. About to dip into a speedy run, Mikoto brow knitted together and her face twisted with confusion. Her senses blared and her head snapped left and right, searching for the threat. She unsealed her claymore from the storage seal at the back of her right hand and flicked the sheath off. Sasuke settled into a defensive stance with his two Tomo Sharingan activated and spiraling. He asked, "What's wrong?" "I know this," Mikoto mumbled, standing back to back with her friend. This happened before, in the Forest of Death during the Chunin exams. Sasuke's eyes bugged wide when the familiar K-intent settled on him, petrifying him to the spot. The ground rumbled with violent tremors, rising from deep under the earth and shaking the landscape. Mikoto gnashed her teeth with a foul curse and wound around, shoving Sasuke away. The ground exploded upwards and a great, white snake blasted out of the earth. Mikoto tumbled into the snake's gaping maw as Sasuke collapsed on his back with a heavy grunt, shocked still by what he had just seen. The snake hissed wildly, exposing rows and rows of venomous red teeth. A lump slowly traveled down its T and settling in the snake's stomach. The white reptile seemed to relish in the boy's terror. Its golden yellow eyes turned up with glee when the boy broke past his petrifaction and scrambled to his unsteady feet. Mikoto. The snake's hood flared open and the snake rose higher, curled back and bellowing with hissing laughter. Asuma swept in a flurry of leaves and snatched Sasuke away, just as the snake blurred down with a strike, hardly missing them and impacting the earth with a resounding thud. It reared back and struck again, missing Asuma's heels as the Junin weaved left and right, distancing them from the white snake. The snake leaned away and stopped giving chase. Sasuke's wide, red eyes never blinked, gaping horrifically at the giant snake. A third Tomo bled into his stare. "Run, Uchiha," Orochimaru bellowed, grinning toothily and flaring his hood again. "Tell the Namakazes that I'm coming for them." He cackled to the high heavens, impossibly tall and large in stature, declaring to the world an oath. "Konoha will burn." Naruto knelt there on the ground, cradling his father as the man spasmed. The boy stared at the man with wide, horrified eyes, frozen still at the vulnerability of his father as the man grit his teeth painfully and wept tears of B. Minato's sea vibrated and shuddered. As chaos ensued around Naruto and the village's alarms blared deafeningly, he couldn't hear or feel anything else but the stark terror that filled every corner of his body. He had only seen his father this vulnerable once before. Flashback, 13 years ago. Naruto stared emptily as his father hunched over his late wife's tombstone, weeping inconsolably and clawing at the soft earth, pleading to be woken up from his nightmare. Rin was at her father's side, clinging onto the man as hard as a 4-year-old could muster, doing her best to keep her father's spirit in one piece. The man turned to his young daughter and cried into her sea, and the girl held him while her father was at his weakest. But Naruto stood back, rooted to the ground. Horrified and afraid. The man that could move mountains. The man that could reshape the planet. The man that reinvigorated the wall of fire. The man openly mourned the loss of his wife, crying into his daughter and resembling a disheveled heap more than anything that was ever previously imposing. It was less about his father's weakness and more about Naruto's shattered perception. Flashback end. A hard hand clasped his cheek, bringing out of his perilous thoughts. Minato, with his eyes rimmed red and his teeth gritting, looked up at his son and patted his cheek again, fighting back the convulsion that rattled through his body. Naruto grabbed his father's hand, the one on his cheek, and he held it. Naruto's stoic face broke as his lips turned down, but Minato fought a grin onto his lips and winked. That was when the real world pushed back into Naruto's ears. People fleeing and ninjas herding them to strategic bunkers around the village, the emergency alarms setting fire to the airwaves, and Tsunade pulling him away from his father. "We're surrounded," she said and pointed at the glowering salamander casually raking its tongue over the village walls. "Kiri ninjas at our south," she jutted her thumb over her shoulder. To the ocean the aforementioned ninjas were crossing over, battering Konoha's seal defense. "And we've got reports of you coming at us from Waterfall Country." Shizune was kneeling over the Hokage, forcing a long S of leather between the man's gnashing teeth and pushing a syringe into his N, forcing a clear liquid into the man's system. Half a minute later, the man's convulsions stopped and he was unconscious. Ras's body was lifted onto a stretcher and draped with a white blanket. He couldn't be saved. "What's the plan?" Tsunade snapped, yanking Naruto's attention back to his grandmother. Naruto didn't answer. Rather, despite the alarms and the looming salamander destabilizing the northern seal barrier with its poisonous tongue, he turned around and realized that his sister was waiting expectantly for him. She and some 30 shinobi crowding him. Those medics that weren't helping to transport the Hokage to a safe location and those that weren't guiding the civilians to safety joined the crowd, looking in either on the ground or bearing down from rooftops and elevated platforms. Gatekeepers stayed at their posts, fueling the barrier with their chakra and genin kept to safe houses. The seal barrier sizzled, but they waited. Naruto wasn't the highest-ranking shinobi, as that went to Tsunade and Shikaku Nara, but Minato had explicitly laid out contingencies on the occasion he was incapacitated, and the primary one was that Naruto would take command as his father's replacement. He had been training his son to succeed him as Hokage from the day he entered the academy. For the time being, Naruto was now the 5th Hokage. Naruto's eyes hardened and he got to work. Hiyashi landed beside a tree at the southernmost border of Konoha, placing his left hand on the tree trunk and looking out past the tumultuous water to the Kiri ninjas throwing water dragons at Konoha's seal barrier, balancing on the water and bellowing jutsu after jutsu. He adjusted his communication headset and activated his Byakugan. The 5th Hokage's orders reverberated in his head, and he forced down a sneer. He would have to put aside Hinata's predicament till things subsided. The seal barrier thrummed at the rocky shoreline of Konoha's border and Hiyashi signed to his right, and a flurry of Junin shinobi rushed in that direction in a muffled blur. They skirted the shade behind and beneath the trees, suppressing their chakra and hardly making a sound as they sped into position. Then, a massive Akamiki paw reached out from the forest, bypassing the interior of the seal barrier and punching through a hail of water bullets, smacking down on a shocked Kiri ninja. Chooser Akamiki withdrew his hand back to the safety behind the barrier, holding in his clenched fist a mangled Kiri ninja and grating his teeth as water bullets and water dragons bombarded the back of his hand. Bullheaded but effective, Hiyashi hummed to himself. He felt a tap on his shoulder and, without looking, Hiyashi gestured twice to his left, and 2 Chunin Hyuga clan mates sped away. Those two were going to stabilize and readjust the barrier. Ever since the fall of Hidden Rain, Minato Namikaze, his oldest children, Tsunade Senju and Hana Inuzuka, and the Shinobi Council had been very active. Hiyashi stayed crouched, keeping low to the bushes and observing with his Byakugan the brief disorganization of the Kiri forces before there was a call among their ranks and they regrouped aboard a ship floating roughly 20 kilometers off the shore, one of 3 warships. Hiyashi spoke into his headpiece, telling the logistics and intelligence department exactly what he was seeing. I see 3 ships. By my estimation, there could be about 500 ninjas inside each. I assume them to be of Kiri affiliation. A series of clicks and snaps sounded quietly by his side, and he spied a Hyuga Chunin taking steady pictures, zooming in as best as the camera could but never once venturing out of the seal barrier. Someone tapped his shoulder again and the man bobbed his head, narrowing his dojutsu and peering into the warships. The 2 Hyuga Chunin had returned from the quick assignment, and Hiyashi relayed this: seals are still functional. Can you confirm if those are the only ships posted there? Inoiki asked, undoubtedly taking notes. No reinforcements. I see no reinforcements. Casualties. A third tap on his shoulder and Hiyashi nodded his head. 4 sentry posts were destroyed. No survivors. Logistics and intelligence were a department of Anbu and had been in operation since the 2nd Hokage's time. Their department was among the most well-funded and well-run in the village, followed by Tea and Interrogation Department. Every Hokage from the 2nd to 4th spread money and resources into logistics and intelligence, and it had been delivering at every turn. The clan head scratched his chin. I wonder how Kiri was able to blindside us. My guess is as good as yours. At least our barriers are holding. Any more orders from Naruto? He wants you and your teams to watch the southern border in case Kiri has any more surprises. He's cooking up a retaliatory strike, but we need to know our current position first. Hiyashi's Byakugan tracked a smaller boat as it burst away from one of the large ships, skipping on the water in the direction of Whirlpool Country. Inoiki's words tapered down at the focused silence on Hiyashi's side. You're seeing something. What are you seeing? A boat disembarked from one of the ships and is moving towards Whirlpool Country. Rin deftly weaved through the trees to her target, her form resembling a brief trail of yellow lights until she planted the sole of her left foot into Zabuza's face, bringing the U-man down to the ground with a thud. Alarmed at the girl's speed, Zabuza's eyes widened but he only caught a fleeting smirk from the girl as she stood over him, raising her right leg straight up in an impressive display of flexibility and balance, bringing her heel down on the bridge of Zabuza's nose and nearly crushing his head to dust. This happened in a matter of seconds. 4 out-of-breath shinobi and a wheezing ninken finally caught up to her, panting as they scampered to their team's assigned muscle. They were each carrying heavy-looking backpacks. 2 of them, an Aburame and an Inuzuka, went to their knees at Zabuza's sides before he could begin struggling, already shaken off the lights dancing in his vision. The Aburame placed a seal on Zabuza's sea as he gagged Zabuza with a rag, and the Inuzuka laced her fingers into a ram seal. Fuinjutsu, seal. Zabuza's body suddenly became taut, abruptly relaxing as his chakra was sealed. It was a seal used on unruly patients at Konoha psychiatric ward, but it would have to do for now. Do you want me to carry him? Rin offered, watching as the logistics and intelligence ninjas whispered among themselves, marveling at the reincarnated man they had restrained. I can take it from here, the Inuzuka answered, tossing a chakra pill into her mouth and gnashing down on it, swallowing and exhaling from her nose as her chakra network became rejuvenated. She picked Zabuza up and tossed him over her shoulder. Then suddenly, Rin felt the air charged with tension. The other ninjas felt the shift as well, and the Inuzuka girl, with Zabuza still on her shoulder, lowered her stance and placed a hand on the ground in her deep crouch. If only it were that easy, a cool voice said in the stillness. Rin wrinkled her nose and rolled her wrists, catching a pair of kunai as they spiraled into her palms, using the flat side of the blade in her left hand to block a katana toward her left shoulder and throwing her other kunai in the direction of the voice. Interesting. The person materialized from thin air, allowing the genjutsu to melt off his body as he dipped to the left. The blade barely missed his T. Meanwhile, Rin wound around to the attacker at her back, SA kick into the person's katana and throwing a handful of shuriken after him, which impacted the ground as he retreated. Within the blink of an eye, Zabuza wreathed back awake and the Inuzuka girl was forced to drop him. Her Aburame teammate sent a volley of beetles that whacked the swordsman aside, though Zabuza righted himself in the air and landed with a hard crunch on his hands and feet. The ink of his seal restraints dissolved off his body like steam, hissing and crackling from being overloaded with chakra. He removed a fake head cleaver sword from a seal on his N, expressionlessly holding the false blade in his right hand. Rin and her teammates were now effectively surrounded. The first person chuckled amicably and clapped his hands, even as Rin leveled him with a stern look, flicking a single kunai to her left hand and cautiously watching both attackers in her low stance. I told you, Tobirama, you cannot ambush a Namikaze, the first person said, visibly impressed. He was a tall man with black eyes and blonde hair that was combed back, having a small tuft of a beard on his chin and a thin mustache above his upper lip. Genjutsu Hozuki stroked his chin. Truly a remarkable clan, are they not? The team took defensive positions, facing outwards. The person that had ambushed them was a man with shaggy, grey hair that was hardly contained in a helmet-like forehead protector that proudly displayed the hidden leaf symbol. Rin had heard many legends about Tobirama Senju from Hiruzen Sarutobi. Currently, the second Hokage flicked his katana down and smoothly sheathed it. He observed Rin and her Junin vest, as the girl cautiously observed him before he hummed and crossed his arms. Namika's standards have improved. The girl fought the smile from appearing on her face at the compliment, switching the kunai to a reverse grip. Lord Second, I don't want to do this. A short haze of regret filmed Tobirama's eyes as he exhaled, unfolding his arms and clasping his fingers together. And yet, you must, child. The Hokage sent a baleful look at the Mizukage, and the Mizukage chortled, not intimidated. As much as I have free thoughts and I can speak as I want, my actions are involuntary. That boy is not nearly strong enough to fully control me. He twisted his fingers to the ram seal, saying to the reluctant girl and her team, go for the head. You'll see why after you do. And with that piece of advice, Tobirama inhaled a little and exhaled, blowing out a typhoon of sharp water at the Konoha ninjas. Instead, the water into the former Mizukage, blasting him off his feet and into a cluster of trees. The Sharingan illusion fell apart with the thunderous crash of trees and shrubs, revealing the real Konoha team to be in the Mizukage's former position. Tobirama's eyes bugged wide, and then he scoffed. Uchiha. Itachi rose out of the ground and immediately raced to Genjutsu Hozuki, while Rin blazed to Tobirama in a flurry of popping yellow lights, appearing at his front in less than the blink of an eye. Tobirama gritted his teeth and crossed his arms in front of his a whisper of a grin lifting his pallid expression at the chakra loaded into Rin's punch, blinded by the prolonged explosion of light from her blow. Her fist fractured Tobarama's forearm guards and the ground reverberated vengefully. Fire grass country border. The procession around Hinata's medical carriage halted at who they saw standing on Fire Country's side of the border. It was a pale man with long black hair that cascaded straight, untangled to his lower back. His royal purple, short-sleeved kimono was casually open at the front to show his bandaged torso, and those bandages rippled out from underneath the kimono and covered his arms and fingers, winding down and wrapping around his ankles and toes, which were clad in a pair of black sandals. His temple was exposed to show the caged bird seal imprinted above his brow. His pupilless lavender eyes vacantly fixed on the leaf procession, and his Byakugan activated without so much as him lifting a finger. Hisashi Hyuga looked at each person till his eyes stopped on Nae, his son. The boy looked as if all the bee had drained from his face. As if he was seeing a ghost. Tears steadily leaked from Hisashi's eyes and a thin crack broke down from his temple to his chin, yet his emotionless expression didn't shatter. A chill ushered over the assembled shinobi. Then Asuma broke the chilling tension, barreling to them with an unconscious Sasuke on his shoulder. The boy had bee tears tracking down his eyes. "We need to hurry," he barked, and everyone shook the days out of their heads. Asuma set Sasuke inside Hinata's medical carriage, still unaware of the rising danger that waited for them on Fire Country's side of the border. He exited the carriage, leaving Sasuke in Sakura's care, and looked around when he wasn't getting an answer. "What?" Kurenai shakily pointed to the border and Asuma turned. Instead of looking surprised, Asuma's face became grim. He took out his trench knives and clenched them in his fists. The mission continues. That was when the Sand siblings and the Sand shinobi hurriedly reached them. They had been following from a short distance from the grieving Konoha ninjas. They were to see the Konoha procession close to their village before splitting off to Suna, where the Sand siblings were going to serve their punishment. Gaara's wrists were bound together by a seal and his sand gourd was gone. Kankuro's war paint was washed off his face, and his eyes were sunken yet frantically alert. Temari's short blonde hair was tied into a simple pigtail. The three of them were wearing the simple white shirt, white shorts and black sandals of condemned shinobi. Temari said, calling for their attention and looking to the sky, "We have more problems." As if on cue, there was a shrill whistle far above them and a clay bird swept down from the clouds, circling above them. An emotionless blonde man with black eyes stared down at them. Beside him was an equally emotionless man with a mask on his lower face. Kushina-sensei. True to Guy's exclamation, a woman with long red hair and twinkling purple eyes nonchalantly walked to them from the west. Her shinobi clothing consisted of a long-sleeved black shirt and black pants, with blue sandals on her feet. On her back was an impersonation of Kushina's prized whirlpool blade, a dual-wielding sword with a purple and blue handle, a circular guard and a black metal blade. Her smile was silent and sorrowful, not nearly as emotionless as Deidara and Kakazu, but unable to speak. "The hell?" Shikamaru murmured, looking between Nejia's father and Mikoto Namikaze's mother, who both were supposed to be long S. "Asuma-sensei, what's going on?" Choji voiced the question the other Genin and Junin had on their minds. "Trouble," Asuma simply said. "Guy, get Hisashi out of the way. I'll take Kushina-sensei." Even after saying that, Asuma felt dread fill his being, and Kushina quietly scoffed. "Kurenai, distract Deidara and Kakazu. Genin, you're escorting Hinata back to Konoha. Quickly." "We can help," Gaara said, injecting himself into the discussion when all of them realized they were severely outgunned. This got more than a few heckles raised among the Genin. Yet, Gaara was right. Even with 3 Konoha Junin, 2 Suna Junin and 4 Konoha Genin teams, they couldn't hope to outnumber any of the ninjas surrounding them, not to talk of Kushina and Hisashi alone. Deidara and Kakazu were deservedly S rank, but the Konoha ninjas were another dimension of power. Adding the Jinchuriki of the One-Tails, a puppeteer and a wind jutsu user could tip the scale, but only a little. "Give us Deidara and Kakazu," Gaara insisted, strongly looking at Asuma as the man glowered down at him with grating teeth. "We'll give you time to take Hinata back to Konoha. I swear." Indecision warred on Asuma's face, but Gaara stood steady with resolve. "Let's make this right," Temari said with weary shoulders, pleading. "Please." Kushina pursed her lips, stifling her grief at what was going to transpire, and what she was being made to do. She involuntarily reached over her shoulders and drew the imitation of her precious sword, splitting it in two and sliding into her favored stance. Asuma swore, "Don't make me regret this." He see the seal bindings on Gaara's wrists and a rush of chakra pulled into the boy, who inhaled deeply with his eyes closed and nearly standing up on his toes as the blockage preventing him from accessing his chakra was removed. "You're not allowed to s." Kurenai tore off Temari and Kankuro's bindings, breathing hotly at the trio. "You hear me?" Kankuro and Temari reacted similarly as they were also freed from the restraints and given their weapons by the two Suna Junin accompanying them. Kankuro a scroll with his puppets inside and Temari got her battle fan. They nodded to Kurenai's warning. Wasting no more time, Temari whipped open her fan and swung it over her head, throwing the clay bird's downward dive in disarray as it was held by wispy wind sides and forcing it away. She and Kankuro took off running in the direction of the careening bird, hopping onto the girl's battle fan and taking off into the sky. Kakazu leapt off the clay bird before it could crash into the earth, though Deodara simply fashioned another bird and bound onto it, allowing the discarded bird to explode with a deafening boom. Meanwhile, Gaara's lower jaw widened and he clambered onto Hinata's medical carriage, much to Asuma's alarm. The boy raised his arms and a flood of sand rushed out of his enlarged mouth, climbing up in an arc around the procession as a wall and protecting them from the shockwaves of the explosion, absorbing it when it rippled across the landscape. Hastily, the boy swung the barrier around and it shifted to form a fist, S against Kushina's crossed blades, stopping her blazing charge from reaching the group. The woman shuffled back a few inches, fixing her chakra to the ground and shoving against the sand fist, though it dissolved into watery sand and swallowed the woman entirely. A quarter of a second later, the sand burst outwards with a shuddering thud of chakra, but Asuma and Kurenai were already on an irate, dirtied Kushina. Asuma s both of his trench knives down on the woman, powering sharp wind chakra on his weapons and pushing down hard on the Uzumaki's crossed blades. The woman nimbly shifted Asuma's attack to her right, sliding to his back and spinning around with a kick to his lower back, but the S-blow only met a mirage. Kushina followed through with the kick, rolling underneath Asuma's swipe for the nape of her N and flipping to her feet, only to meet Kurenai's fist. The blow didn't so much as shake Kushina, who swung the sword in her right hand and decapitated Kurenai, but this one too turned out to be an illusion. The real Kurenai stumbled to the ground, exiting a shimmering haze of air and grasping her T, where a thin line of B leaked from her N. Kushina froze at the sight of Kurenai fighting for air, and Asuma capitalized on that, running into the woman's guard and plunging his knives deep into Kushina's eyes. The whistling chakra burst out from the back of her head in a shower of dust and skull fragments. Finally, Asuma dragged the blades down, splitting the woman's face apart, and planting a straight kick into Kushina's stomach. Asuma counted his lucky stars that Kushina wasn't willingly attacking her comrades. The kick carried Kushina half a yard away, separating her from her swords and laid spread eagle on the ground. Her eyes were gone and her face was broken into 3 pieces. Gaara jumped off the carriage, covering himself in the sand he had used to shade him from shockwaves, lumbering to Kakazu with a heavy but unwavering pace. The Suna Junin split off, one going to Temari and Kankuro, and the other rushed after Gaara. Tenten took the reins of the horse, pulling the medical carriage, snapping it and driving the horse into a frenzied dash. The genin teams ran after it. Lee had to grip Neji under the arm and speed alongside the carriage when the Hyuga had not yet snapped out of his mournful anguish. Guy separated from the group, removing the weights on his ankles and wrists. He dashed to Hisashi, and the genin team skirted around their battle. Asuma hurried to Kurenai, kneeling at her side and gently prying her hand away from her B. A relieved sigh left his mouth when he saw that the sword stroke was deliberately shallow. Kushina didn't want to K her comrades, pulling back on decapitating Kurenai, and so much as harming Kurenai had petrified her. As a highly skilled sensor, Kushina wasn't deceived by Kurenai's invisibility genjutsu, yet couldn't follow through with the K blow. Kurenai too was shaken up, having come so close to losing her head at the hands of her idol, but overall, she would recover. A great gasp shook Asuma out of his thoughts as he mechanically applied a large band-aid to his girlfriend's T, consoling her by rubbing her back. "Is she okay?" Kushina groaned, snappishly sitting up and turning her eyeless, broken face to Asuma and Kurenai, who was still catatonically on her knees. Her face mended itself, albeit with thin cracks running down her eyes to her chin. Her purple eyes returned and she flicked them to Kurenai. Whatever had stopped her from speaking was now damaged, and it was located in her head. Asuma's eyes became wide, whispering in a weak voice as peril slowly set in, "Why yeah? Please tell me you have reinforcements on the way," Kushina pleaded earnestly, creaking to her feet and rolling her shoulders. "I don't know how much longer I can hold back." Why yeah? Asuma lied and Kushina frowned, seeing the man steadily get to his feet and hold up his trench knives, thrumming sharp wind chakra to them. Kushina sighed, cracking her fist. "You've always been a terrible liar, Asuma. Konoha, what about us?" Yugao pressed Naruto. The fifth Hokage turned to them, looking away from Ebisu as the man updated him on the condition of the civilians. Every other ninja moved about with purpose. Naruto's purple stare leveled with the two Junin, expressionlessly taking in the battered state. Medics had declared them free from poison, but that still didn't assure Naruto of their state of mind. After all, they had watched the fourth Hokage being carted off, possibly from poison. Putting aside himself being the junior age-wise, the Hokage addressed them with intense eyes. "Do you still want to fight?" Kakashi and Yugao caught the message underneath the question. It wasn't a question of if they could still fight, but if they still wanted to. The Junin replied with curt nods. Catch up to Team Inuzuka, reinforcements meant to support Hinata's return to the village, consisting of Team Inuzuka, Tayuya, Kidomaru, Sakanakon, and Jirobo. Bring the Suna ninjas with you. I want everyone back and in one piece. No exceptions. The former members of Orochimaru's Sound 4 were being rehabilitated in Konoha and had been under the village's probationary out-of-free serf shinobi list. Bringing them into active service was desperately needed to protect the village. Since their team sensei, Team Inuzuka, had deemed them ready for fieldwork, Naruto had to trust her assessment. Kimimaro, Karen Uzumaki, and the other Sound victims on probation had to remain behind. Dismissed. Yes, Lord Hokage, Kakashi and Yugao saluted, flickering away to catch up to the reinforcement team. The buzz of the village gradually lowered. Everyone was doing what they were told. Guards were posted around bunkers and the L&I department were in contact with Konoha ninjas outside of the village, laying low till they received orders that told them otherwise. Naruto wanted Konoha to be in a good position before it could reach out to allies that needed help. Selfish, yes, but the Hokage didn't care about that. Protecting the village was his main priority. The streets cleared out and Anbu evacuated more civilians from their homes. The red-haired boy stared down Hanzo, and the impassive Amekage raised an eyebrow at the unintimidated teenager that had been issuing commands to his seniors not too long ago. The boy closed his eyes and took in a slow breath, puffing up his sea and gently exhaling from his mouth. Then he opened his eyes and a pair of Sharingan spiraled sluggishly. A masked man dropped down to Naruto's right, falling to a knee when the boy flicked his dojutsu at him. The boy muttered something, muffling his lips so Hanzo couldn't read his words. The man nodded again and rose to his feet, clapping his hands and lacing them into the dragon hand seal. The boy lowered into a runner's starting position, pressing his fingers into the ground and eliciting a tremor. Hanzo's eyebrows lifted higher at the amount of chakra building up in the boy's core, bracing himself for what was to come. Red mist ebbed off the boy's form and the boy's form vibrated. Then he was gone. Hanzo bared his teeth painfully and was lurched backwards, clean off his feet and into the sky when the boy's shoulder tackled him, closing the distance in less than the blink of an eye and clearing him off his salamander's head. The force of the tackle broke two of the Amekage's lower ribs. Still, the man gathered himself again, racing through the sky further and further away from Konoha, and clobbering hard fists into the boy's back. The boy didn't budge or release him, clasping his hands together at Hanzo's back and pushing his shoulder deep into the man's gut. On what felt like the sixth blow, and now considerably far from Konoha's walls, Hanzo witnessed a giant tree burst out from underneath his startled salamander summons, engulfing the frenzied creature with its branches and impaling it in many places with several smaller trees, dispelling it when it realized it couldn't wriggle out of the chakra-draining trees and it could no longer endure being by branches. The plume of smoke covered Konoha's northern wall. The boy unwrapped his arms from Hanzo's middle and pushed away with his feet, using Hanzo's sea to further the distance. They were now coasting over a rocky, dusty plain. The wind whistled angrily in their ears and the air heated up around them as they began their arcing descent. Naruto flickered his fingers through four-hand seals and exhaled the sun. Fire style, great fireball annihilation. Hanzo had to give the boy credit, he certainly wasn't going easy on him. The man shielded his face as he was swallowed up by the flames, crashing into the side of a mountain with a rumble that reverberated across the continent. Naruto didn't relax, down on Hanzo as the flames still sizzled on the man's charred skin and pulled the man into a Sharingan illusion. The Hokage breathed out, calming his ragged heart and deactivating his dojutsu when he saw that the Amekage was frozen. He ignored the errant flames lapping at the air and turned around, looking to the sun to get his bearings. His calculations before tackling Hanzo had been right. He was in Waterfall country, an allied nation. The noise of water bellowing down waterfalls far in the distance entered his ears as he finally cooled down, stepping away from Hanzo and looking around carefully. They were close to Waterfall and Earth Country's border if the rocky ground was any indication. He scratched his head and wiped away the bead dribbling down the corners of his mouth. Hanzo's blows hurt more than he was allowing himself to reveal. The teen looked a bit to his right. Konoha should be this way. Hanzo groaned and snapped upright, and Naruto shut his eyes with exasperation. Of course, they're invulnerable to genjutsu. He noted that the invulnerability to illusions wasn't immediate, as it had taken Hanzo about 15 seconds to shake off the illusion. Also, Hanzo was invulnerable to falling hundreds of kilometers to the earth and being encased in fire, though with the same time lapse between healing and being invulnerable to illusions. Naruto filed those small bits for later, seeing the man wheeze back to his feet and his features gradually repaired, yet with visible cracks in his face and body. You won't happen to know how to properly end this, would you? He didn't get any response. Rather, the man cracked his N and rolled his shoulders. Wonderful. I have some research to do. Naruto's shoulders sagged at the prospect. One should never mistake Naruto, as remarkable as he was, for someone that enjoyed studying. He smirked invisibly at the ragged man, giving the Amekage a two-finger salute. I'll be seeing you. Naruto was gone in a burst of red mist, and out of the mist exploded a blizzard of ravenous praying mantis. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.